Hi and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video tutorial what I'm going to be doing is showing you something called a list comprehension. And what a list comprehension is a really useful and concise way of creating lists. So let's go through a arbitrary example first of all to demonstrate what a list comprehension looks like. So let's say we wanted to create a list of multiples of 8 for some reason. So this is the code we might come up with if we didn't know what a list comprehension is. So what we've got here is simply a statement here that is creating a empty list called multiples of 8. Then we've got a for loop that's going to start with x being equal to 1 and end with x being equal to 10. And what it's going to do each time it executes is append to multiples of 8 the value of x times 8, so whatever x is multiplied by 8. And then we're going to just print out our list at the end. So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so we can see there that we've got the multiples of 8 going all the way from 8 times 1 to 8 times 9. And if we wanted to print out 8 times 10, we could just increase that to 11 and then would get 80 there as well. So we can see how that works there. But what we can do is, instead of having to do this for loop here to create this list, what we can do is do something called a list comprehension, and I'll show you how that works now. So we can do it all on one line, and if we just wanted to print this list, all we'd have to do is say print, and then we open the square brackets as if we were about to create a empty list, as we've done up there. But instead what we do is we write in the square brackets x multiplied by 8 for x in range 1 to 11. And what this is basically saying is create a list, that's why we've got those square brackets in there, where each item is x multiplied by 8 for x in range 1 to 11. So we can just run this code now. If we comment out this like that, and we run this line of code here, what we should get is exactly the same result as this as we did with the previous time we ran our code. And there we have it. We get the exact same list with this list comprehension. So this list comprehension here is produces the same result as running this code here. Let's just uncomment that for a second. And if we wanted to actually store this list that this list comprehension produces, all we would have to do is say multiples of 8 equals, and then that list comprehension, and we can print multiples of 8, and if we comment out that previous code there and we run this code here, we'll get our list multiples of 8 printed out. So as I said before, all this is doing is creating a list where each element is the value of x in this for loop here multiplied by 8, and all it really is a condensed version of this code up here, this for loop code. So let's say, for example, we wanted to create a list containing the names of the players that are about to play a game. This is the code that we might write if we didn't know about list comprehensions. We're going to say how many players are there, then create an empty list to store the player names, and then for the number of players, ask what the player's name is, and then append that player's name to the end of the list. And then we're going to print that list out. So if we just run that code very quickly and see what it does. So 3 players, Dave, Sarah, and Hemingway. And then we can see we've got a list containing those names: Dave, Sarah, and Hemingway. We could alternatively do the exact same thing using a list comprehension. So we comment that out, and we say print, and then we're going to say in our list comprehension input, enter your name for X in range player count, and we're going to still need the line which asks what the player count is. And so what this will do is it will call the input function for the number of times that our for loop runs here, and it will create a list containing the return values of that input function. And this code here is equivalent to the code I've just uncommented here. So we've got these 4 lines here of code, this for loop and this print statement here, can all be written on this one line using a list comprehension. So let's run this then and just prove that it does actually do the same thing as our previous solution. And we can see it's done that there. So it gave me the option to enter the number of players, and that's that line of code running there. And then all of this code here, the bit where it's asking me to enter a name and printing out this list that we've created by using this list comprehension inside the print statement, is all done on this one line using a list comprehension. Now I'm going to show you a further example of how we can use a list comprehension, and this is specifically aimed at showing you how you can use a condition in a list comprehension. So say for example we wanted to create a list of all of the even numbers between 1 and 50. So if you didn't know about list comprehensions, you might write this code to do it. So we're creating an empty list to hold our even numbers. Then we're writing a for loop which will run 50 times. If the current value of x when you do integer division on it by 2 is 0, so we're checking if it's even by doing that, then add it to the list. And if we run this code now, let's see what we get. So you can see here that we've got all of the even numbers in a list all of the numbers that are even from 1 to 50 in a list. We can do that with a list comprehension, and it's relatively straightforward. So all we do, we can comment out this, is we write our list comprehension and we say we want a list containing the value of x for x in range 1 to 51 if, and this is the bit that's different, we're saying if x percent 2, so if when you do integer division on x by 2 the value is 0. And then that is our list comprehension, and what we will get when we run this code is the same list. So if we run this now, we can see that we've got that list. So we can use a condition in our list comprehension to create a list with only certain values in it, like I've done in that example there. So I want to just go through one final example now, and what I've got here is a extract from the code from the 2017 AQA A-Level Paper 1 pre-release program. And what AQA have done here is they've used 2 loops to create a list to represent a 2D list to represent the landscape of on which their simulation is based. And if you're familiar with that program, you'll know what I'm talking about, but if you're not, it doesn't matter, because all they're doing here is creating essentially a board to do a simulation, and they've used 2 for loops to create that 2-dimensional list to represent that board or landscape. But you'll be able to guess what I'm going to say now. You could do this with a list comprehension, more specifically a nested list comprehension. So I've written a modified version of that extract there so that we can run it without the rest of their AQA's program, so we can see what that little bit of code was doing. And you can see all it was doing is, if I expand this out to fill my whole screen here, you can see all it was doing is creating a two-dimensional list which will to represent a sort of grid structure, and all they were doing with that particular bit of code was filling each item in the inner lists with the value of none. So I'm going to write a list comprehension now which will do exactly the same thing. What we want each item of our outer list to be in this two-dimensional list is to be a list. So we're going to have that first part of our list comprehension, which says what each item in the list is going to be another list comprehension. And in the inner list, each value is going to be none, so I'm going to type none. And then for y in range landscape size. So this inner list comprehension here will create each of these smaller lists. So what the other program was doing was it had a nested for loop structure, and the inner for loop was creating each one of these inner lists, and the outer for loop was creating the list which contains each one of these inner lists. Oh, and I've spelled range wrong over there as well. And this list comprehension in here is doing the job of the inner for loop, in the sense that it's creating each of these inner lists. Now all we need to do is finish off the outer list comprehension, which is going to do the job of the outer for loop. Okay, so this list comprehension here is going to do exactly the same thing as the code that AQA have written here to create this landscape here. What they've done is use a nested for loop. What I've done is written a list comprehension here, which will create a list which is the size of the which is the length of the landscape, with each element in that list being none. And I'm going to create one of those lists for every time this list comprehension, this for loop in this outer list comprehension runs. So this list comprehension here is going to do the job of this part of their code here, which is creating those inner lists containing the value of none, and the outer list comprehension here is doing the job of this for loop here, which is creating the list that contains those inner lists. So let me just run this code now and show you that I get the same result as I got down here. Okay, so you can see that that's worked there. So you can see that there are lots of ways that list comprehensions can be used to simplify code where you've got where you're creating lists and you're using a lot of lines of code and a lot of for loops to create lists, and sometimes some temporary variables in there as well to create lists. And list comprehensions are a way of doing this creation of lists on a single line. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this tutorial video. I hope you found it useful, and thanks for watching.